Excellent. So I'm a start on time, end on time kind of person. So I think we'll get up and rolling. Firstly, to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Kate Roll. I'm an associate professor at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, also known as IIPP, here at UCL. I'm a political scientist, and I help to run the MPA program. And I'm super pleased to be joined by two of my fantastic colleagues, Cecilia Rikap and David Eaves, who are both associate professors here and who are sort of the brains behind some of our pathways that we offer to students in the MPA program. So like I said, there'll be some taster lectures, and each of them will be giving a little insight into the economics and digital pathways, and I'll be speaking a little bit to the public administration pathway. So let's get rolling. Just as a note, this session is being recorded. We then share this for those who either have to leave early or maybe couldn't make it. It's also set up in a webinar style, so there's a Q&A box. So if you have any questions throughout the event, we can either try to answer them in real time, or we'll be able to gather them at the end, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So that is how we're going to be working. And in terms of what we'll cover today, I'll give a very brief introduction to our institute, the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at UCL. Then I'll be talking about the Master of Public Administration program, the MPA, and the three pathways. Then we'll have the three taster lectures. First David, then I'll speak, and then Cecilia, covering the digital, public administration, and economics pathways, respectively. And then we'll have time for Q&A. And before we go further, just thank you all for coming and taking your time. I know you are busy, spread all over the world, and you're about to potentially make a really important decision about where you want to study. I'm glad you're here, glad you're getting more information, and thank you for your time. So just a little bit about us. We're the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, founded by the noted economist Mariana Mazzucato, now about 6 years ago. And our mission is to change how the state is imagined, organized, and evaluated to tackle social challenges. We work on the interface between research and policy. Of the many departments I've been part of, we're probably the most policy active in the mix, which is notable and wonderful. And we believe that innovation in public policy can create fairer and more sustainable society. So all of us are sort of motivated by the big questions of the day, the big challenges of the day. And although we have different mission statements, vision statements, the one that I really love is what's up on the screen, this idea of innovation is political. And I think that is what brings all of us together here, whether we're come from a practice background, or we're political philosophers, or we're hardcore economists. We've all been brought together, I think, around this idea. And that idea of innovation being political can mean, the state has an important role in innovation, in setting its direction, in pushing its pace, but also that the consequences of innovation, the consequences of social innovation, of technological innovation, have political repercussions, affect us, affect our lives, and also that we, as a citizenry, can affect that innovation process too. So innovation is political, means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I think it brings us together, and it is a motivating factor. We have a PhD program at the Institute. We do lots of public engagement. We do research. But really important to what we do on the day-to-day is the MPA, the Masters of Public Administration. We bring in incredibly talented students every year to study with us, usually for a year, although some folks do it part-time or over a longer period. And it's incredibly enriching for us, and I think equally for the students. This is a shot of some of the students from a couple cohorts ago. Mariana's in the middle, for those of you who know her work. We are interested in teaching the dynamic skills required for purpose-driven organizations, whether public, private, or civil society. And we sort of make this claim that there's no equivalent postgraduate degree that combines these sort of alternative approaches to economics, alternative approaches to policymaking, with this focus on structural change and innovation. And I think that is really true, and that sort of shines forth in the curriculum that we've designed. There's not sort of stats 101. We go straight into sort of the meaty stuff, and the students who join us are really along for that ride. To get a little bit into the nitty-gritty, and to speak a little bit about this pathways question, which is what we're going to be sort of looking at for the rest of the session. This is the flow. This is the MPA curriculum. We work over 3 terms. The red boxes are what we call our core modules that all students take with us. Those blue boxes are elective modules that we take in the 2nd term. And then in the 3rd term, students all either write a substantive piece of research, a dissertation, or take part in a placement program, which is a real signature of our MPA, where we work with public sector organizations on a real challenge. And those are just starting right now. So it's an exciting time of year for us. The core modules include modules on new economic thinking, innovation and public purpose, power, politics, and systems change. This is what I lead as a political scientist, making decisions, evidence and evaluation, one of David's amazing modules. In the 2nd term, creative bureaucracies, which is led by Rainer Kettel, who's a deputy director, and then transformation by design, a design module, which is again sort of a unique twist on the MPA and something we think is really important. But then you've got these 2 elective modules, and this is where the pathways come in, where we think that it's important to help you navigate. You have the entire course catalog for UCL sort of spread before you. And so how do you choose, what do you want to study? What do you want to come out of your MPA with, and how do you want to show a certain amount of specialism or show that you've got competency in an area? And we think that helping you pick those electives wisely and lining them up can help you do that. So what we've done is we've created 3 pathways. The first pathway is the public administration pathway. And this is sort of for those who are interested in governance, who are interested in working in the public sector, and are maybe interested in some broader questions around governance, innovation, urban development, things like that. And so the sample modules that we would encourage you to take in the public administration pathways are listed here, along with many others, but these are just a few examples. So whether it's contemporary political philosophy, or smart cities, or urban innovation and policy, these are ones that we think meet the idea of IAPP, innovation, public purpose, and also hit that public administration box. So that's the public administration pathway. And then ideally in the placement or in the thesis, you'd continue to work on some of these public administration themes that you explored in your core modules, and then of course picked up in your elective modules as well. The economic policy and political economy pathway, which Cecilia will be speaking to in her mini lecture, explores the relationship between states and markets, the economic challenges faced in modern capitalist economies. Some of the sample modules that I include here, these are all offered outside of IAPP. So the economics of property rights, energy, technology and innovation, international political economy. But we also have sort of in-house elective modules that are really important and popular. So one is a course called Rethinking Capitalism, where we bring together MPAs, and then the other half of the students in that group are policymakers. And then we've got a new elective module that's being started by one of our professors, Josh Ryan Collins, which focuses on public finance, a really important topic, and we think is going to be really excellent. Oh, whoops. And then last but not least, digital transformation pathway. This is one that David is going to be speaking to. We have a module within house that David leaves called digital transformation that we'd encourage you to take for you to do the digital transformation pathway. But then also, again, across UCL, drawing from the richness of this large global university, emerging dilemmas in digital technology policy, but also things like anthropology of techniques and technology, which sounds fascinating. So again, where you just study with us, you do the core modules, and then the pathways would help you navigate those elective modules as you move into your final term. So without further ado, I want to hand over to David to give a little taste of this digital transformation pathway, maybe speak a little bit more to the pathway. And again, we'll have plenty of time at the end to do more Q&A on how the course works and all of that. But without further ado, let me stop sharing and I'll pass over to David. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Exciting to be here and have so much fun in the MPA program with our MPA students. Like such a great cohort of people who not only enrich in our classroom, but then go on to do interesting work. And I actually work quite hard to pull our alumni back into our classroom to show students, both for the core course and for this elective I teach, of how people are using the things that they're learning in the real world, kind of applying it right as they get out of the university. So maybe to open up, I always like to talk first about like the kind of digital transformation pathway in this kind of fun little way. So David Foster Wallace, kind of well-known author, has this great commencement speech he gives once where it opens with a little joke where there's these two fish that are swimming along, and then this big fish swing the opposite past them. And as the big fish swims by, it turns to the two small fish and says, "Hey people, how's the water today?" And then the two small fish kind of keep swimming for about 3 or 4 minutes. And then one of the small fish turns to the other small fish and goes, "But what's water?" And I love to share this story because I think often people think about kind of digital technologies as like a tool or like a mechanism that you're using. And I really think of it much more in terms as like it's the medium within which we all now swim. And so I share that because the next thing I always tell my students is I really actually hate the term kind of digital government and even digital transformation to some degree, because digital government kind of suggests that there's this like unique thing that is digital, and then there's like a non-digital thing. But really, like almost all government services now, even like in many markets, whether you're interfacing with a human or not, the human you're facing with is in turn then calling someone or getting on a computer and entering information about you. Like it's all intermediated by technology. There is no digital government. And my big fear is that when people talk about digital government, the audience thinks that you're talking about the future. Whereas we're really very much talking about the present. Like there is no digital government. There's just governments now in a digital era, and there's really just government. And the question is how do we respond to that and how do we think about that? And how does our failure to understand where we are right now limit our ability to enact the kind of changes that we need to confront the crises that are currently facing us and to reimagine the state and reimagine the way that we're doing things? And just to like really be clear, like that inertia is very real. So however, like I'm like older, so I'm always like it's fun to like meet my students who have like only ever interacted with their government using a computer, or even like sometimes only interact with the government using a smartphone. But if you actually look at like kind of like the history of government going as far back as you'd like to go, like the overwhelming majority of our history is a kind of paper-based version of what government looks like. And we've really constructed government edifices around the notion of kind of paper being the fundamental unit of information. It's only relatively recently, and I know like for some of you it may seem like a long time, but it's only relatively recently in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that you begin to start having kind of digital era technologies touching the government. And even then, it's all really back office. It's really kind of things that are hidden from citizens. You only actually start interacting with your government using digital era technologies over the internet and things like that, starting kind of 2006, 2010, and that's in some places of the world. So this is a very, very new phenomenon that governments are grappling with. And we have centuries of processes and centuries of practices that are kind of steering us in one direction while we confront all of these new tools and technologies that are trying to push us into a new and different direction. And it's a lot for governments to kind of grapple with. And, you know, the kind of metaphors and the tools and the kind of like dominant theories for thinking about this, I don't think quite work in this era. And we're really wrestling with what do new forms look like and what are new ways of thinking about this. So a lot of these practices get caught, like, you know, in those previous eras. And then maybe the most classic one is just the way that we even think about the way we deliver services and do work inside government, which is this very nice kind of like linear project management process where you do some analysis and then you like draft a policy memo. And then typically actually that gets thrown over some transom from the policy team to the implementation team, who then have to grab it and then go make that work happen. And this is sometimes referred to as waterfall because it comes out of a kind of methodology where you do each one of these things in sequence. The water flows from one down to the next, down to the next, and you don't go backwards. Like once you've taken a step, now you're locked in. I always like to remind my students are often like, oh, I don't do that. And it's like, do you currently work on a project that has a Gantt chart? Because if you do, like you are deeply, deeply embedded into a waterfall process, even if you are convincing yourself that you're not. And these things make a ton of sense when you're building things like this. Like you want your big bricks to arrive before your small bricks. There's a ton of planning you want to be doing in front. And a lot of government work still looks like this. Like we're still building things that look and operate like that. These things, when we're in worlds of like high degree of certainty, the future conditions are known, the goals and objectives are known, we're wonderful at doing it. The problem is when it comes to things like technology, our success rate is absolutely dismal. Not just in the public sector. In the private sector, it's not that fantastic either. It's just particularly bad in the public sector. And we have failure rates that are just fundamentally, in my view, kind of unacceptable and a complete waste of public value and failing and like eroding confidence in the public sector by not performing the way that they should be. And that's because like once you're thinking about technology, you're now in a terrain of much less certainty, both in government comfort, but also in the technology you're using and they're evolving. And those uncertainties are sometimes driven by new policy challenges that are coming at us. Sometimes they're driven by the fact that the unintended consequences of the impact of the policy we wanted to have is shifting or doesn't happen. And so we need to be able to adapt and adjust. But it's also being driven by the fact that like the technologies themselves are evolving and that our users' expectations are evolving and what they expect of us as public sector players evolving. And that requires new ways of doing work and new ways of doing projects. So we spend some time thinking about like what agile approaches to policy making, not just project management, but policy making and project management look like. So in the digital kind of stream, in the digital transformation stream, we're really centered around thinking about like what is this minimum viable knowledge about technology that public leaders need to be effective in their field. And I've had a huge privilege of working with faculty members around the world in building out like an open source syllabus for doing that. So it's based on my course and a few other courses that have been developed. And like we train faculty now in over 200 universities on how to do this. And we try to bring that into IPP. And so the way that fits in is in IPP, you have your kind of core courses that Kate was outlining before that you take. And then we have these kind of core competencies around kind of user design, design thinking, user needs, design thinking, data security, privacy that we think are kind of minimum of viable knowledge is necessary to be an effective public leader. And we try to put those into our digital transformation class. And then you get to use those if you want in your placement or on your kind of dissertation thesis that you do in the third term. And then on top of that, there's a rich range of kind of digital courses that we've kind of vetted across the UCL campus that you can go take as an elective as well to follow this pathway. So that's kind of our vision about how this all looks. So I hope this is interesting. There are great pathways, lots of great options here. This is just one of many, but I hope it kind of reveals some of the richness that we have at IPP and some of the kind of bigger challenges we're trying to wrestle, but also keep it grounded in how we actually make change happen.
Thanks so much, David. So I'll pick back up and I'll go into my mini lecture. And thanks for the Q&A and the comments in the chat already. It's nice to see that. So I'm going to be picking up on a theme that actually David touched on. And I think, we didn't coordinate. And so I think this is actually a really nice reflection that we're all thinking that some of these similar concepts are really core. David's giving a thumbs up. I think he already knows what I'm talking about here. But I wanted to talk about an engine versus a forest, which is another way of saying the difference between something that's complicated and something that's complex. This sounds like a simple idea, basic, but it's one of these things that if you start to really put your hands around it, it's quite important and central to the work we do. So, the analogy, the metaphor, the engine, complicated, right? Takes many hours of training to understand it, fixing it, expertise, knowledge, a lot of embodied knowledge in that machine. Something breaks, the engine stops. But you can fix it. You replace that part, the engine runs again in the same way it was run before. Then we have the forest, right? Also, takes many years of expertise to understand how it's working, lots of different parts. But when you start to get in something like a tree falling, the forest doesn't stop. right? The forest keeps moving. Sunlight opens, some seeds germinate. We have this sort of constant movement, and we have that constant sort of what we'd call a complex adaptive system, right? If we're being techie about it, and there's also something, even if I step back and thinking about making this slide, it was very easy for me to go on Google Image and ask for a PNG file of an engine. But when I had to even find a picture of a forest, what picture was I going to use? How do I draw an image boundary around something like a forest? Should this have been cropped way up in the sky? Should this have shown, the fungal networks that sit in the roots? Should this have been wider, right? So something like drawing a boundary around something that's complex and open is really hard. So you're starting to see in this sort of, really basic set of comparisons, some pretty interesting, some pretty important kind of distinctions. So we have things that are complicated, we have things that are complex. Both exist in the world. And I think where David, and where obviously I'm going a little bit, is a lot of our tools, a lot of our processes have been designed and thought about for a complicated world, or problems that we decide to simplify into making them complicated. And we struggle around complexity. So we need to be thinking about, what's the difference between something that's complicated versus complex? If we are working on complex problems in a complex world, how do we actually step into that rather than avoid it? I'm going to talk about a tiny piece of research that for me is just fun. So this is this scholar, Bonert, who wrote this really nice paper where she was talking about these are, sort of 16 characteristics of complexity. These are pretty standard kind of definition, things around self-organizing, that adaptation, what I talked about, the tree falls, something else grows up, this idea of openness, where it's hard to draw a boundary, emergence, feedback, all of these sort of maybe buzzwords that you guys have heard around systems thinking or complex systems, adaptation, path dependency, also a theme that's really important in innovation studies and science and technology studies. So these are sort of 16 characteristics of complex systems. And what she did was she went to a group of sort of informed folks and had them draw pictures that would, typify or represent one of these characteristics. So, if we were in a classroom all together, I would say, raise your hand and tell me which you think this is. So she had all her participants draw one of these 16 characteristics to show something about complex systems. I would have this use the chat or use the Q&A. But here, this is the way that her participants were showing this idea of path dependency, that what came before shapes what comes after. If you guys have been part of business school cases, you might know the QWERTY keyboard case, where we think about something that was determined by some physical constraints in the past, continues to shape technologies sort of irrationally now in the current day. So this was sort of the different ways that folks were seeing path dependency. I'll do one more just because I love these images. This is one that I mentioned before. This is how her participants were drawing open systems, trying to capture that idea that they can't be easily bounded. You can see different, the thought processes of people trying to draw this. Arrows going in and out, dotted boundaries, open, closed, a lot of wiggly lines. So I really like this as a thinking tool, that she was having people really go deeper into what do these definitions of complexity actually mean. So there we are, open systems. Again, when we're thinking about complex systems, we're thinking about interdependency, nonlinearity. Nonlinearity is just a very fancy way of saying sometimes you put a huge amount of work into a problem and nothing changes. Or sometimes you put a very small amount of work into something and it busts right open, right? We have these non-linear or unexpected relationships, and things like systems thinking or complex systems dynamics can help us think about what holds systems in place, Why can we put so much effort in one area and not see any movement, whereas change can happen in another way? Like I said, the module that I teach is power, politics, and systems change. And it's really organized around this really sort of deceptively simple question again around why do things change? Why do things not change? When do they change? What does it take? All of these. So thinking about these complex adaptive systems, interdependency, nonlinearity, questions of ecology and adaptation. Folks who've done innovation studies might be familiar with the idea of a multi-level perspective and niches. Again, drawing both from a language of innovation, but also of ecology, and even, yeah, so you've got, yeah, I'll pause there. But we have these wonderful sort of paradoxes, that equilibrium despite openness. So we might have that forest sort of continue onward as it is, even though there isn't a strict boundary around it. And this also sort of anti-Cartesian idea that we can't just break things apart and study them in separation. So you maybe would be able to do that with the engine and then be able to model how it fits all together. But that's very hard to do with sort of our lived world, our complex adaptive world. So here we are, we're back to this idea of the engine and the forest. So if we take that seriously, if we take this idea that we live in a forest world, but we keep designing policy for an engine, how do we actually deal with this? How do we take this on board and move forward? There's a really wonderful piece by Foster Fishman who said, and this is just, this is really echoing what David was saying in the waterfall model. We think A leads to B leads to C, we have that intervention leads to an outcome. But, Foster Fishman is saying, actually, we have this much more networky, webby kind of situation. And the quote that I pulled is something that I really love, and again, speaks to that nonlinearity, where levering change in one part will lead to the desired outcome only if concurrent shifts happen in relational and compositional elements of the system. So there needs to be multiple changes that happen at the same time for things to move. There need to be sort of complementarities across the system. So it's, pushing this idea, asking how do we work here? So if we take this seriously, how do we move forward? What do we know about working in rather than denying complexity? And I think something that the MPA does really well is sitting with this challenge, right? Not running away with it, not teaching tools, or at least not teaching tools uncritically that have been designed for that engine world. So I'll pause there and pass to Cecilia, but yeah, just a little taste of what we do in my module and what we are thinking about more broadly in terms of public administration.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to see you all. I wish we could see already our faces and super open also to all the questions that you may have afterwards. Before sharing my slides so that you can still see me larger, I will say a few words about myself. I am, as Kate introduced, also associate professor. I'm associate professor in economics because I did my PhD in economics. And at IIPP, I am also the head of research. So before I forget about it, in my capacity of head of research, I wanted to invite you all this afternoon because we regularly organize open talks and we host book talk series. And this afternoon, we're hosting one book presentation about mass surveillance, and it's connected to digital. It's also connected to the role of states. I think definitely it's something that will speak a lot about part of the critical research and analysis that we do at IIPP. And also connected to that, let me add something else, which is that at IIPP, in this unique capacity to connect policy research and teaching, I think that or my expectation is that students find a place where they find the concrete motivations and reasons for these changes that in terms of policy we see that are needed. Because it's very, very easy to get lost in the so many things that we think that need to be changed in the world, and identifying which ones are key and why. And the question about why, I think that it speaks a lot about my module, as well as Carolina Alves' module which is a module on new economic thinking. So these masters has this kind of like unique combination of very practical discussions that at the same time are grounded in frontier research, I would say, and frontier research taught directly by the people that are developing the concepts. So I teach economics of innovation at our masters, but I teach it together with Mariana Mazzucato and Carlota Perez, who are two of the living scholars that are among the most known working on precisely topics of economics of innovation. So, and we also, just to emphasize how vast the discussions at IIPP are, we also offer enrichment lectures. So on top of the official curricula, every module will host additional lectures that are optional. We encourage all the students to attend always, but these extra lectures that we call enrichment lectures are also an opportunity to further engage not only with people that are honorary fellows, for instance, in our department, as well as with policymakers with whom we are working and perhaps come to IIPP for other reasons and then join discussions with students. So after all this, I will now share my screen and give you a sort of intro lecture to intro to my lecture one. So it's an intro of my module, and in the first lecture, I discuss what is the place of innovation in economic theory. And usually this would start by saying that most approaches to economics of innovation will put its emphasis on claiming that the firm, that the company is the key for innovation. And most approaches in economics would also say that looking at innovation, looking at knowledge is relevant from an economic point of view because of the effects of knowledge on the economy, because of the effects in particular related to how innovations are used, how they transform productivity, how they impact on labor, how they have also impacts on economic growth. And there is this very established evolutionary idea that with innovation, regardless the type of innovation, then we will have a moment of diffusion of these new technologies, which will lead to economic growth and eventually progress. This is also why in so many policy speeches, we see it these days, both in the North and in the South, so in the core and peripheral countries, this eagerness to get more innovation with the aim of being more competitive, more productive. But also in my module and at IIPP, and I think this is where we become quite distinctive, we go beyond this knowledge as progress myth. Because not every type of knowledge will lead to progress, not every type of economic growth will lead to a better life. And part of that from the economics of innovation module perspective is to understand that technology is also developed for controlling whom or what? Well, we will discuss about how technology has been developed for controlling workers in the workplace, among others, through the separation of conception and execution. The fact that companies have an R&D laboratory, for instance, that is the place where the new technologies are developed. The fact that more and more, as we were discussing already, I think Kate was saying, technologies are embodied in the machine. And this embodiment of technology in the machine also means that there is a de-embodiment of technology from the brain of the worker. And this will also lead us to think about how some digital technologies are also being developed for controlling, for planning production processes, not only for transforming states, but also transforming companies and how that happens. But there is also another angle that we will cover in this process of rethinking of technology also for control, which is how the core or the global north has used its monopoly of technology to control peripheral countries. And for instance, the dependency school or dependency theory has been arguing since the 1960s actually, so for over half a century, that development is conditioned precisely by the monopoly of technology that is exercised by core countries. So there is another form of control of core countries controlling peripheral countries through technology. And this will also lead me or give me the chance to discuss with you in the module my own contribution to this discussion, which is within the framework of seeing leading corporations as intellectual monopolies and how they have this capacity to control beyond ownership, not only production, but also innovation processes. So we will discuss, for instance, about the relationship between big tech companies and startups and how startups are conditioned by big tech companies and how they coexist and how there is this different pattern of innovation that is neither the small company, the entrepreneurial companies, the smaller entering and exiting and everyone with equal chances of innovation, nor the idea of just big companies innovating and doing everything inside their R&D laboratories, but actually a third pattern of innovation where we see this coexistence of big companies with small companies, with startup companies, but the big ones are the ones that rule and that ultimately define not only what these other companies are doing, but also what we know, what we don't know, shape research agendas, and the type of technologies that we get as a result may not necessarily be the ones that we need for solving those major challenges that Kate was talking about at the beginning. So this is what, and again, we didn't coordinate. When I saw your slide, I said, okay, I will go back to innovation is political by the end of this presentation. In this case, not with a banner, but with our tote bag. And precisely it's because of this complexity in terms of how science, technologies, and specifically innovation are produced, that is relevant to go back to the question about innovation as political, as always being political. And this is why in our module, we will not see innovation as something that is produced by isolated individual actors, but actually as producing systems. We will also discuss a lot and put forward the question about the purpose of innovation, for whom, for what are the consequences also of the innovations, but also we will not ask only about the uses of technology as an economic question, but we will also see as an economic question the discussion about the production of innovation and new technologies. And all this will lead us to connect back also to one of the core and distinctive features of IIPP, which is that this will help us discuss whether it's possible and how should we shape states and create new institutions for innovating for the public and planetary good. So with a clear purpose that is different from controlling parts of our society. Thanks a lot and open to questions. And I will paste the invitation for this afternoon's talk in the chat in 1 second.
I beat you to it, Cecilia. I've popped it into the chat. And David, I think you put a message in that maybe change it to everyone. Great. So I was going to share my screen, but my final slide just says thank you in Q&A. So I'll just pause there and invite folks to use the Q&A function. We've already had a few really interesting questions. It seems like people might have access to the chat, in which case you're welcome to put them there as well. And so I'll give a moment for questions to come in. But oh, here we go. Great. Excellent. So we have a question from Francesca about the part-time MPA, which is a great question. A relatively high percentage of our students, just over 10%, well, maybe 10 to 15%, will do the MPA part-time, which means that they take it over 2 years. We also have a route called modular flex, where you take the MPA over up to 5 years, but more common is to do it part-time. People often do this because they either have care responsibilities or they want to continue working, or because they just want to spread it out a little bit more. It generally works by literally cutting that curriculum, that set of slides in half, where you take 2 modules rather than 4 modules per term. The one difference is in the final term of the first year, you do independent study, whereas you do your thesis or placement in the final term of the second year. Not to get too in the weeds. I think the main thing I want to say about part-time is that I don't think there's really any downside to part-time. It's something that I think students have a really good experience in. They get a little bit more time for the material to percolate. They're able to build relationships with faculty over 2 years. So I think part-time is a really good option. It works super well for many of our students. And yeah, happy to answer further questions around that. Great. David, do you want to take the question from Marco about placements?
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Thank you, Marco. It's a great question. And another thing that I really like about IPP, and it's not like necessarily entirely unique to IPP, but it is not something that I think all public affairs schools do. So in the third semester, as you know, you get this choice between kind of going deep and doing some research, or you can do a placement. And we're incredibly privileged here at IPP. So what we do is we do an open call, and organizations actually come to us and ask to work with us. And they have to kind of shape up a project. And the project has to kind of work for an 8-week period. It's got to meet some objectives we have to actually like facilitate learning. It has to be kind of on topics that we cover. And so we often actually end up with more projects than we have students that can fill. So an incredibly privileged position. And then the students effectively kind of bid or choose which ones they'd like to go on. And we try to get the students to align around like 5 or 6 or 10 projects, depending on how many students we have, with about 3 to 5 students per project. So you're not on your own, you're working in a team. And here, what's happening is you have a faculty or a staff member as a kind of a supervisor who's there kind of on call to help you, but really it's your opportunity to take the ideas and concepts, both conceptual and kind of practice, that you've learned during the first several semesters and bring them into a context where there is a client who is actually hungry for advice and wants different type of thinking. And you basically, like with great clients, you basically have unfettered access to the organization, to the people, and then of course doing your own research on the outside with other similar type institutions. And you have basically doing an 8-week sprint to come up with a set of recommendations for the problem that they've outlined. And I think this is an enormously rewarding project. Many students use it as another way to signal the sector or the type of work they'd like to have when they're graduating. And it gives them something very tangible that they can show to prospective employers about like the type of work they've done and the way they've applied the learnings that they've gotten at IPP.
That's awesome. Thank you, David. Cecilia, can I invite you to answer the next question about PhDs?
Sure. Yeah, I was actually going to tell you that I can take that one. So about our PhD program. So we have a PhD program that is separated from the master's. So it's not a 4-year option where you need to do the master's with us and then can continue with the PhD. The PhD is a 3-year program without any specific module, but we do offer internal training and discussions, and of course, you become part of IIPP in full as part of the staff. We don't make really this difference between we call PhD students, but actually you're a scholar with us. That it's just at a different moment in their career. We do have 2 options for the PhD. One is our original PhD in Innovation and Public Purpose, and then we recently introduced one more focused on economics. That one, if you don't have an economic background, you will be required to take the modules in econ from our masters. So it's something that it's a way to make sure that you do have some economic background by the end of the program. So the first year you will be asked to take new economic thinking, economics of innovation, and rethinking capitalism, and probably now also we will include public finance, which is the new elective that Kate was mentioning. In terms of how to get admitted, the first step is always to contact your potential supervisor, and that supervisor needs to agree on you applying with that person for the PhD program in IIPP. So the first step, again, is to writing a project, having an idea of what you want to do. A PhD is new research. It requires to make a research contribution. It's not a policy recommendation. It's not a policy report. It's not a policy job. It's a research job. And this is important. Like the MPA is different, because at the MPA, you are learning, we are teaching you, and the lectures and everything at the MPA will be oriented towards helping you navigate, in particular, the public sector, but also civil society organization, and others as a public administrator. So just to make this emphasis in the differences between the two programs. And again, the PhD first step, I would say step 0 is to have a project, to know what you want to work on. And once you know that, you can check among all of us if any of us is working on related topics. Of course, we cannot be responsible. We cannot just take as our PhD students people that are working on things that we cannot contribute to as supervisors. So there needs to be a connection or a relation, and then you email that person, you establish a conversation, and if that person agrees with your proposal and with you applying for the PhD, the next step is going through the UCL Bartlett School website to apply for it formally. Footnote to all of this. If you want to do a PhD with Mariana, because Mariana has an extremely busy schedule, as you can imagine, we have a sort of separate track to apply for that. And you need to go through our website, and instead of emailing her, you feel an expression of interest, and that will be assessed more or less once a month. I say more or less because, of course, in August we are not assessing, and it might be that we are not assessing in December either. But besides that, we do regular assessments, and I would say that's it. This is part of the admission part. Feel free to ask questions about scholarships. We don't have internal IAPP scholarships. As any department at UCL, we are eligible for UCL scholarships. Generally, we are awarded one per year, but this depends, of course, on the candidates. And then there are other scholarships that include more universities in the competition. Like there is one that is called UBEL. But just for you to know, all these calls for scholarships and applications run usually between December and January. So if you want to start in September, a PhD with us is already late for applying for these scholarships. Not late for applying for the PhD program, but yes, for the scholarships.
Great, thank you so much. And I saw there were a couple PhD questions. So if there's more, Cecilia can answer in the chat. So let's see. We've got a few questions open. So I'll take a couple just quickly. So Matteo was asking about engagement with the built environment. And, he's picked up on a very good point, which is that we are set within the Bartlett, which is the Faculty for the Built Environment, and also the home of sort of the world #1 architecture school, which is very cool. And so it means that we've got really interesting sort of colleagues across UCL who are working on built environment, on urban issues, policy issues. And so there's a lot of interaction and cross-pollination there. I mentioned Josh Ryan Collins, who is an amazing land economist, in addition to doing public finance. And so he's really interested in those kind of questions about housing, as well as we work with people like Ryan Bellinson, whose real focus is urban systems and sustainability. So there is that community within UCL, within our faculty. There's a mention of MOIN, so the Mission-Oriented Innovation Network. I don't know off the top of my head if there's folks in the built environment sector, although a lot of them are sort of cities-based or innovation labs tied to place. So a lot of place-based work or place-based innovation, which I think is maybe a different way to think about sort of maybe a similar question. So that's very, very important. And yeah, you're part of this UCL community, part of the Bartlett community. And so there's collaboration, there's open events, there's wonderful shows, things like that. So there's lots of opportunity to take advantage of being part of that. Let's see, I'm going to answer maybe quite a different question from Samuel. Sam, so what level of supervision can MPA dissertation students expect? And then will they be able to take part in research community activities? So dissertation students, they're in a relationship with their supervisor. So some of this, some of that is answered really by how do you like to work? you know, by the time you're in grad school, you know yourself pretty well. So we set sort of a baseline, the idea that you'd meet, you know, at least sort of fortnightly or be in touch fortnightly with your supervisor. But some people like short, frequent meetings. Some people like much more time to work. But in generally, it's at least a fortnightly meeting over a number of months, which I think is you know, a really nice level of support. And then we do set up opportunities for students to be working together, sort of doing sharing peer-to-peer as their research evolves. We haven't actually had students during, you know, share their dissertations in research meetings, in part because they're often sort of working up to the last moment and then submitting. So they don't really have a finished piece of work so much there. But absolutely, they're part of the research community activities. There's a theory reading group that's run by PhDs that MPAs sometimes join. MPAs also are really good at self-organizing and bringing in speakers or bringing in activities that they want to do. And also, like David said, you know, we're a quite sort of flat structure. And Cecilia was mentioning, you know, PhDs are very much part of the Institute. We really, you know, almost all of our students come with significant work experience. And I think we really honor that by taking you guys seriously as experts in your areas and then helping you develop as scholars. So you're very much part of the Institute and very much welcome to all those research activities. Maybe a long way of saying that. Cecilia or David, either of you see a question you'd like to pick up?
Sure, I was kind of replying some directly on the chat, but
Great.
but I can go up and check. Okay, we're I was actually replying to the one about research assistants and how to get those job opportunities. And what I was writing down was basically to say that we keep communication with the whole cohort throughout the year about many things. So you will be receiving invites like the open talk today, but you will also be receiving invites about internal discussions and job opportunities, including the job opportunities at IIPP. So just by being part of the cohort and checking your email and the other communication channels that we establish every year with students, you will know about it and you will be able to apply for those jobs.
Yeah, I was wondering if the person asking that was on the PhD track or the MPA track, because I think on the PhD track, that definitely not unusual. On the MPA track, it's much more unusual for you to be a course assistant in the year that you are taking the MPA. That said, I want to be really clear. I want to say half my course assistants are often MPA students who graduated the year before or the year before that. And so there is actually a real desire, like nothing gets you to really learn and digest and think about the material like teaching it. And so like running a seminar or being engaged is a great way to really double down. And I get a large number of students who enjoy being at the IPP, want to stay engaged. Sometimes they get jobs, but they are able to negotiate with their employer a little bit of time every week to come and be a course assistant. And I love having them in the classroom.
Let me also jump in and say a few more things about the assessments. There are many questions about assessments, and also a question that it's more about research that I will reply very briefly. The question says, do you encourage students to join the IIPP ongoing research? Yes, of course. We invite everyone to join our ongoing research and we post it everywhere. So of course you're all invited to see what we're working on and share comments if you have and so on and so forth. But then going to assessments, every module will have ideally more than one assessment. And this is because we want to make sure that we assess you in different ways to take into account diversity in your skills, in your capacities or capabilities. So definitely, for instance, in my module, you will have an oral presentation that will be based on the discussions of the first half of the module, and then you will have a final essay. And for the final essay, you will have time to submit it by yourselves online. So we don't have exams like what you would expect for an undergrad degree, but usually other ways of assessing that include oral presentations, policy discussions. For instance, my final assessment is usually choosing an innovation, science, technology policy, existing one, and analyzing it through the lens of all the different things that we discuss in the module, or some of them. So always trying to connect it, even in the more conceptual modules like mine, always connecting it to real problems and to existing policies. Then someone was asking also about whether if you choose to do a dissertation instead of the placement, whether you can be part of, let's say, the research activities at IIPP. And my answer would be that everyone, you don't need to do a dissertation to be part of the research activities at IIPP. Everyone that is doing a master's with us, regardless of whether you choose dissertation or placement, or where you are in terms, if you're in term one, you still haven't chosen one or the other, you will still be invited to join the different things that we do internally as IIPP.
We just have a couple minutes left, so maybe I'll take these two curriculum questions from Francesca and Gerardo. So the first one on quantitative skills. This has been a big debate within our curriculum design, and actually another thing that differs a little bit. We don't do a basic stats course. We don't do a basic quantitative analysis course. That's something we decided not to include. The reason for not having those type of sort of very, baseline skill sessions is because we find that our students come in with very diverse needs. So for some, regression analysis will be part of their day-to-day. For others, they'll never need it. And then also they come in with very different sets of backgrounds because it's a multidisciplinary course. So we've got people who are working economists who come with incredibly strong econometric skills. And then we've got people who are in law or design. And again, this isn't going to be part of their work. For those who want to build their quantitative skills, so maybe reframing the question a little bit, this is where you get to use your optional modules, where you can find really good courses that fit your exact needs and your level at UCL, and we can help you sort that out. And then also, I think, both David and I are big believers, if you need a Stats 101 course, in using some of these great online tools where, they've been developed out of great faculties and, do some self-study and use your time in the classroom where you want to be in debate, in deep thinking, and use your MPA for that, and use your other time for remembering, what a normal distribution is. So that's my view on the quantitative skills. With Francesca's question about organizational psychology and change management. I worked at a business school before coming here, so these are terms that I'm familiar with. We don't have such a strong management focus in this MPA, in the sense of using some of those literatures. Although the module that Reiner teaches on creative bureaucracies is very much embedded in some of that, some of those ideas. So yeah, David, do you want to help me out here? I'm thinking, yeah, go ahead.
So I would say there is so in my policy analysis class, as well as my digital transformation class, there is a strong connection to management and implementation.
Yes.
I think I am a firm believer in the disconnect between policy and implementation has proved to be fatal to the credibility of governments in many places around the world, and is also really not leading to the outcomes that I think we'd like those of us who are kind of like have visions of kind of more progressive government is not leading to those outcomes. And so there is a strong emphasis in my policy analysis class of not being, your final assignment is a policy memo, but there is an implementation section to that memo. And there's a very strong emphasis throughout the class about the connection to practice and the connection to implementation and the work that you're doing and the dangers of separating those two things. And then I do some additional lectures on thinking about management as well.
Thank you, David, for bailing me out on that one. Much appreciated. So we've reached the end of our time. There's lots more questions in the chat. There's a great one around learning difference. And I just to say to that person, we have a whole system called a SORA, which is what we use instead of EC. So happy to answer that question over email or elsewhere. But I want to bring us to a close and really bring us to a close with first, a thank you to Sonia and her team for setting this up. Secondly, a huge thank you to David and Cecilia for sharing a little insight, a little window into their modules. Now I want to sit in on more of their lectures. And then just, a huge thank you to everyone for joining and taking part. And I'm really sorry we didn't have time to answer all of your questions. Just to say, all of us are easy to find online. There is a contact information on the MPA website. So I'm happy to answer your questions over email or set up a short call. Very happy to do that. Yeah, just to say that, thank you again for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.
Yeah, take care, everyone. Thank you so much.